The first tremor that rattled Flight 287 was small enough that half the passengers dismissed it as turbulence. But the second one hit with the force of a slammed door, sending a shiver through the metal skin of the aircraft. Plastic cups toppled. A baby cried. Someone muttered, "That wasn't normal." 30,000 feet over Colorado's jagged backbone, the late afternoon sun painted the horizon gold. Below the clouds, wind churned through the Rockies like a restless animal, but that wasn't the real threat, not yet. Captain Roland Morris had flown for 26 years. He'd seen engine fires, cabin decompressions, onboard medical emergencies. He had earned the quiet confidence pilots wore like armor. But when the third tremor hit, hard enough to jolt his knee against the throttle quadrant, the calm cracked. Warning lights blinked on his panel. Then one turned red. Then two. Then an alarm he had never heard outside training simulators began screaming. "Engine 2, First Officer Nathan Hayes said sharply, scanning the readings. "Massive temperature spike, fuel flow irregular." Roland flipped a switch, shut it down. But the shutdown command didn't take. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, trying again. The aircraft shuddered violently. This time, the entire cabin felt it. Passengers jerked awake as if ripped from sleep. Overhead bins rattled. Loose items rolled under seats. A flight attendant, pushing a drink cart, grabbed the edges to keep it from crashing into a passenger's leg. The captain grabbed the intercom, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an unexpected engine anomaly. Please remain seated." A deafening bang cut him off. The right engine burst outward in a flash of sparks. Metal fragments tore free, flung backward like shrapnel into the sky. Inside the cabin, gasps and screams exploded like a chain reaction. Captain Morris's hands froze. Because something else was happening. The engine wasn't just failing, it was ripping itself apart. "Shutting it down," Hayes barked, fingers flying across the controls. Alarms wailed. Red lights turned the cockpit into a hellish glow. Finally, after long, terrifying seconds, the engine died. But the damage was done. Systems flickered. Displays glitched. The aircraft lost altitude with a stomach-dropping drop that sent passengers against their restraints. Oxygen masks dropped, swaying like pale ghosts in the cabin. The intercom cut out with static. Captain Morris took a deep breath, knowing every passenger would hear it. We've lost engine 2, stand by." He didn't add the words that were burning in his mind. "We may be losing the whole aircraft." Through 40 rows of chaos, one woman remained completely still. Row 14, Seat A. Harper Lane. While everyone else panicked, screaming, praying, grabbing masks, she watched the wing with unsettling stillness. Her gray eyes flicked over every vibration, every flash of warning light, every unnatural movement. She knew exactly what had just happened. And worse, what was coming. A flight attendant stumbled past, pale and trembling, trying to calm passengers. Harper caught her wrist gently. "That wasn't just an engine failure," Harper said. The attendant blinked, breath shaking. "Ma'am, please stay in your seat." Harper didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. "You need to listen to me. We don't have long before the systems cascade. The captain will start losing control soon." The attendant frowned. "How would you know that?" Harper held her gaze, her voice low and steady. "Because I used to fly fighters with worse damage than this." The attendant's expression froze. Before she could respond, another violent lurch rolled the plane 5 degrees sideways. People screamed as luggage fell and drinks splattered across the aisle. Harper stayed calm, bracing with a hand on the headrest in front of her. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, precise. She had seen chaos before. She had flown through it. When the plane steadied briefly, the attendant leaned in again, her voice barely audible above the wailing alarms. Are you serious? Harper nodded once. Get me to the cockpit. The attendant's face drained of color. I'm not allowed. You don't have time to follow rules, Harper said softly. You have time to save lives. The flight attendant swallowed hard, torn between training and instinct. Another alarm blared. The plane dipped again. Passengers shrieked. Harper stood slowly. Her muscles didn't tremble. Her breathing stayed sure. She tugged her seatbelt free and stepped into the aisle like she was stepping onto a battlefield. The attendant stared at her. You really used to fly. F-18s, Harper said. Carrier landings, night ops, engine out drills more times than I can count. The attendant inhaled sharply. And then she nodded. This way. They began moving toward the front, pushing past terrified passengers. A mother was sobbing into her child's hair. An elderly man clutched the armrest so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. People whispered, "We're going to die," under their breaths. But Harper didn't hear their words. She heard the engines. She heard the strain in the metal. She felt the imbalance in the roll axis. She knew the captain was fighting for control and losing. Halfway to the cockpit, a sudden jolt sent Harper stumbling into a row of seats. A businessman grabbed her arm. Sit down, they'll handle it. Harper gently pulled free. They can't handle what's coming. The attendant gestured frantically. Hurry. They reached the front galley. The cockpit door stood solid and locked, separating passengers from the truth spiraling inside. The flight attendant pounded on it. Captain, emergency assistance, open up. Static crackled through the door. No answer. The plane trembled again. Harper placed one hand on the door, feeling its vibration, the faint give in the latching mechanism. Most passengers didn't know. Cockpit doors weren't designed to be unbreakable fortresses. They were designed to resist intrusion, not a determined pilot with a good angle. Move aside, Harper said. The attendant stepped back, stunned. Harper braced her feet on the floor, angled her shoulder, and drove her weight into the seam of the door, hard. The door shook but didn't give. A passenger shouted from behind, "What the hell are you doing?" Harper ignored them. Second hit harder. The latch strained. Passengers gasped. Third hit, Harper felt the give, the internal mechanism beginning to bend. Fourth hit. Something clicked. The cockpit door cracked open an inch, just enough for smoke and the smell of burning circuitry to spill into the galley. Harper pushed it wide, and instantly her breath caught. The captain was slumped sideways in his seat, barely conscious, sweat dripping down his temple. First Officer Hayes lay on the floor, trying to push himself up despite a bleeding gash on his side. Sparks crackled from a partially melted panel. Warning lights strobed violently. Half the screens were dark. Harper stepped in. It felt like stepping into wartime again. And as she surveyed the chaos, a grim certainty settled in her chest. This plane wasn't just damaged. It was dying. And unless she did something, 300 people were going down with it. Behind her, passengers watched with wide, terrified eyes. Harper Lane rolled up her sleeves. "Get me a headset," she said. Her voice was calm. Deadly calm. The kind that meant she'd been here before. The kind that meant she wasn't letting this plane crash. Not today. And not on her watch. The cockpit smelled like burned plastic, oil, and fear. Smoke curled upward, curling around warning lights that flickered like dying stars. Captain Morris slumped in his seat, white-knuckled, muttering under his breath. Hayes groaned on the floor, one hand pressed against the cut on his side, blood seeping through his sleeve. Every panel on the console screamed failure. Engines offline, hydraulics faltering, the artificial horizon flickering like a dying heartbeat. Harper Lane didn't hesitate. She grabbed a headset, yanked the cord taut, and pulled it over her ears. The noise was immediate, a cacophony of alarms, autopilot failure warnings, and distant screams from the cabin. But Harper had done this before. Not this plane, not these exact engines, but 1,000 variants of dying metal in 1,000 different skis. She had stared into fire and ice at 20,000 feet and survived. "Captain, can you tell me what you can control?" she asked calmly, scanning every readout like a seasoned tactician. Roland's voice cracked through the static. We're partially stable. I can manipulate the throttles manually. Rudder and ailerons are unpredictable. We've lost partial hydraulics. He swallowed hard. I don't know if we can keep it level." Harper's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't panic. Panic was contagious. Fear spread faster than fire in a dry cabin. She needed calm. She needed control. "Hayes," she said, kneeling beside him, "can you reach the manual override?" Hayes shook his head. "It's impossible. You'd have to crawl over half the console and reroute the power in ways the manual explicitly warns against. You could arc the system and fry everything." Harper nodded slowly. "Then we do it carefully, step by step. I've done worse in an F-18 with an engine on fire and a tail assembly cracked in two." Hayes swallowed hard, eyes widening. You're serious?" "I'm serious about survival." Her voice didn't waver. "Not now, not ever." Meanwhile, the plane lurched violently. One of the wing flaps had frozen mid-position, throwing the aircraft into a sickening roll. The cabin screamed, the metal bending and shivering under stress. Passengers clutched each other, bracing against the walls. Drinks, trays, laptops, and suitcases toppled over like dominoes. A mother's child screamed in terror. A teenager stared blankly, phone recording the chaos. From her position at the console, Harper's mind raced. There were only 3 viable options: attempt a controlled glide to the nearest airport 70 miles ahead, risk an emergency landing in the mountainous wilderness below, or try to regain rudder and aileron control manually. Each choice carried risk, but one stood out. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about what worked. "Hayes," Harper said, voice calm but urgent. "We're bridging Circuit 9 to restore rudder hydraulics. On my mark, don't touch anything else." Hayes nodded shakily. He trusted her. He didn't have a choice. She bent over the open panel, wires like veins inside the cockpit, red sparks licking the edges. Harper's hands were steady, but she felt the electricity thrumming through the metal, the smell of ozone prickling her nostrils. One wrong move and they could lose more than control. They could lose the entire plane. Outside the cockpit window, storm clouds gathered, rolling over the peaks like angry gray waves. Lightning forked in the distance, illuminating snow-capped ridges that would shred any aircraft foolish enough to brush the ground. Below, the Rockies yawned, a beautiful but merciless graveyard. Harper ignored it. Her eyes were locked on the console. Her hands moved instinctively, fingers coaxing wires, switching circuits, listening to the hum of failing engines. Then a jolt shook the plane, nearly throwing her forward. The alarm screeched louder. Hayes grunted, barely maintaining his position. It's too much," he said. Harper didn't answer. She didn't have the luxury. Every second counted. Her mind flicked through split-second calculations. Weight distribution, wing tilt, thrust imbalance. She had done this before in simulators, in reality, in combat. But this, 300 civilians, untrained passengers, screaming and panicking, was infinitely more fragile than any mission she had flown. Finally, she connected the bridge. Sparks flew. Hayes ducked instinctively as a metallic zing filled the air. Harper's fingers itched with adrenaline, but she forced them steady. The rudder readouts began to twitch, then stabilize. "Rudder control partial but usable," she said. Hayes blinked, almost disbelieving. I can't believe that worked." Harper allowed herself a tiny nod. "We're not out yet." Outside, the storm was worsening. Wind gusted like a freight train, tossing the aircraft in all directions. Rain pelted the fuselage with icy needles. Lightning split the sky in a dazzling, terrifying display. The passengers screamed, prayed, and cried, but Harper had no time to comfort them. Every move mattered. Every second counted. Captain Morris finally lifted his head, pale and trembling. You're controlling." "I'm helping," Harper said, "but we need to reroute more circuits manually. We can't rely on autopilot, we can't trust hydraulics. It's too damaged." The captain's eyes widened. You're a pilot." Harper's jaw tightened. "Used to be. Coulson Falcon. Carrier operations, fighter jets, but that doesn't matter. Right now I'm your best shot at keeping this plane and everyone on it alive." Hayes and Morris exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and relief. Finally, Morris nodded, his voice strained but resolute. "Do whatever you need to. Take the plane." Harper exhaled slowly, letting herself feel the weight of responsibility. 300 souls depended on her. Every child, every elderly passenger, every stranger with hopes and lives to protect, they were counting on her. "Captain, I need full throttle on engine 1. Gently, we're redistributing weight to compensate for the loss." Morris obeyed, hands shaking. Hayes monitored the readouts, voice tight. "Throttle up, slowly, partial stabilization, yes, it's working." Harper's mind raced. She calculated the approach. Keep the aircraft level, regain rudder, avoid the storm, avoid the mountains. There was no room for error. Outside, the storm churned, clouds like molten metal rolling over the peaks. Any misstep meant instant disaster. A passenger screamed behind her. Harper ignored it. She couldn't afford distraction, not now. Minutes stretched into eternity. Harper adjusted the rudder manually, steering the plane through a pocket of calmer air. The altitude held at 19,000 feet, then 18,400, then 17,900. Hayes muttered the numbers like a prayer. "Partial control maintained," Harper said, voice steady. "We can make this work." A sudden warning ping made her flinch. Engine 1 was overheating. Sparks flew from a fuse box. Hayes ducked instinctively. Harper's eyes narrowed. She could feel every vibration through the seat, through the floor, through the controls. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for rescue," she said. "We're not going to make it to the airport, too far, storm too strong, but there's a clearing down there. Narrow, risky, barely long enough. We'll land there if we have to. Are you with me?" The captain and first officer nodded, pale but resolute. Harper adjusted her headset, bracing herself. Outside, lightning illuminated the valley below. The snow-capped peaks glistened like knives in the storm. She took a deep breath. "Then let's land this plane," Harper said. And just like that, the next phase began. The descent into uncertainty, chaos, and survival. Every second was a gamble. Every movement would decide the fate of 300 souls. And Harper Lane, former fighter pilot turned accidental savior, was the only one who could hold the balance between life and death. The cockpit smelled of smoke, burnt circuitry, and fear, a thick, metallic tang that clung to the air like a warning. Harper Lane's eyes scanned every readout, every flickering light, every damaged panel. The chaos in the cabin was muffled behind the door, but she could still hear the low hum of panic. Passengers whispering prayers, bobbies wailing, and the metallic groan of stressed fuselage. The storm outside painted the windows in streaks of rain and lightning, each flash illuminating the jagged Rockies beneath like a jagged blueprint of death. First Officer Hayes was crouched near the center console, white-faced and shaking. Blood from his gash dripped onto the panel. He looked at Harper with a mix of disbelief and awe. "You're actually serious," he said, voice trembling. Harper didn't look at him. Her attention was on the yoke, the throttles, and the delicate dance between engine, rudder, and ailerons. "I've been in worse situations," she said quietly. "You just didn't know you'd meet one of them today." Captain Morris, slumped and pale, muttered something unintelligible. Harper caught the words, "We're doomed." "No," Harper said firmly, "not if I can help it." She took her seat with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. Her fingers moved over switches and levers like a pianist, each press deliberate, exact, and essential. Her mind flicked through every variable: engine power, weight distribution, turbulence, wind shear, wing stress, storm trajectory, mountain elevation. A miscalculation of a fraction of a degree could spell disaster. Partial rudder control confirmed, Hayes whispered, eyes glued to the readout. You did it. Harper's jaw tightened. We're not done. Lightning cracked outside, striking a ridge less than a mile away. The flash illuminated the cockpit, and Harper's face was bathed in pale white light. Her hands didn't shake, but her heart raced. Each beat was a countdown. She knew the descent would be the most dangerous part. They couldn't attempt a conventional landing at an airport. They were too far, the storm too violent. The only hope was a narrow valley below, flanked by cliffs that would shred wings in a heartbeat. The margin for error was microscopic. "Captain," she said, "I need you to throttle engine 1 manually, gradually. Keep the plane steady. Don't overcompensate." Roland's hands shook, but he obeyed. "Throttle slowly, yes. Reading stable, sort of." Harper didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. Fingers danced across the manual override, coaxing life back into dead systems. Sparks leapt from a damaged circuit panel. Hayes ducked instinctively. Harper's face flinched slightly at the smell of burning metal, but her hands stayed steady. The plane shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed in an angry rhythm, but Harper didn't hesitate. "Hayes, prepare for manual glide. If we can stabilize altitude, we can thread the valley." He looked at her like she had just spoken in a foreign language. We're talking about threading a canyon in this storm, with one engine." "Yes," Harper said. "It's our only option. We either do this or everyone dies." The descent began. Harper adjusted the throttles and rudder carefully, every movement calculated to counter turbulence and wing stress. The plane tilted dangerously, then corrected, trembling like a wounded bird. Behind her, alarms blared, the cockpit lit up in angry red. Outside, the storm was a living thing, buffeting the fuselage with wind gusts and rain that stung like needles. Lightning split the clouds above, reflecting off jagged peaks that seemed intent on tearing them apart. "Altitude's dropping too fast," Hayes said, his voice tight. "We'll hit the ridge at this rate." Harper's eyes narrowed. She adjusted the yoke, feathering the controls with precision. The plane responded, sluggishly at first, then more steadily. The mountains rushed closer, jagged and merciless. Clouds whipped past the windows, streaking everything with rain and white-hot flashes of lightning. "Prepare for turbulent spikes," Harper said calmly. "Brace for sudden gusts. We have to thread between the peaks." The captain's voice trembled. "Harper, are you really going to try this?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Otherwise 300 people die." The first gust slammed into the aircraft, throwing it sideways. Harper countered with a delicate twist of the yoke, muscles straining. Sparks flew from exposed wiring as the cockpit lights flickered violently. The plane tilted sharply, and Hayes grunted, barely maintaining his balance. Outside, cliffs loomed, jagged and dark. The valley they needed to reach seemed impossibly narrow. "Watch the left wing," Hayes shouted. Harper twisted the yoke again, balancing the aircraft with a precision that made every second feel like eternity. Her mind calculated wind pressure, wing flex, engine power, and rudder angle simultaneously. A fraction of a second miscalculation, and the left wing would scrape the cliff face. She couldn't afford error. The plane lurched again. Harper held it steady, teeth gritted, sweat streaking her face. She could hear passengers screaming faintly through the intercom, the sound distant but urgent. "Hayes, feed me altitude numbers every second," she commanded. "Copy that," he said, voice tight. 4,03835. Harper adjusted again. The aircraft responded, slowly at first, then more steadily. She could feel the tension in the metal through the seat and the yoke. The valley floor below loomed, barely wide enough for the plane to land. Snow patches glistened in lightning flashes. Trees and rocks waited like predators. The first officer gasped. "We're almost at Valley Entry. You can't, we'll never make it." Harper didn't answer. She couldn't. Every muscle, every thought, every instinct was focused on the approach. She aligned the plane's nose, adjusted the flaps manually, and stabilized the rudder. Sparks continued to fly from exposed panels, the smell of burning circuits thick in the air. "Brace for sudden gust," Harper warned. The plane was slammed sideways, rolling dangerously. Harper countered instantly, twisting the yoke with precision. Metal groaned under stress. Lights flickered. Outside, lightning split the sky. The valley entrance was ahead, narrow, treacherous, unforgiving. Hayes muttered, "God help us." Harper's mind ignored fear. There was no time, no room, only action. The aircraft passed the first cliff wall with inches to spare. The left wing scraped barely against the wind, sending a shudder through the cabin. Passengers screamed. Harper's hands were steady. She adjusted the rudder again, feathered the throttles, and kept the glide precise. The valley stretched before them, long enough but still jagged. Trees and rocks were 100 feet away, closer than comfort allowed. Every second was a battle between instinct, skill, and physics. "Keep her steady," she murmured to herself. "Just steady." Lightning illuminated the valley floor. Snow patches, rocks, and tree stumps glistened, mocking every miscalculation. Harper's eyes narrowed. She could do this. She had done worse. In the sky, every second was a life-or-death calculation, and she would not fail, not now. Another gust slammed the plane. The fuselage creaked, panels rattled, alarms screamed. Harper countered, adjusting the rudder and flaps. Hayes muttered numbers. The captain, white-faced, whispered prayers. Harper Lane, former fighter pilot, Coulson Falcon, knew the hardest part was only beginning. Because once the valley floor arrived, there would be no more margin for error. And she wasn't about to let 300 people die on her watch. The cockpit reeked of smoke, burnt circuitry, and the acrid tang of adrenaline. Harper Lane's eyes swept over the console, absorbing every warning light, every flicker, every panel screaming in protest. Captain Morris slumped in his seat, pale and trembling, like a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. First Officer Hayes groaned, clutching his side where blood seeped through his sleeve. Sparks danced across the panels, illuminating the cockpit in harsh, angry flashes. Harper exhaled and settled into the pilot's seat with a focus so intense it seemed to silence the alarms, if only in her mind. The cabin beyond the cockpit remained a hurricane of terror, passengers screaming, clutching each other, tears streaming, prayers whispered under quaking breaths. The metal groaned with every gust of wind that tore through the fuselage. "Rudder is responsive," Harper said calmly, but her fingers didn't stop moving. "Flaps partially functional. Engine 1 stable for now. Engine 2 gone." The captain coughed, voice hoarse. I don't know if we can hold it." Harper didn't reply. She didn't need to. Every motion, every calculation, every flick of her wrist was an answer. She had done worse. Engine fires on an F-18, tail damage mid-combat, landing on a carrier in zero visibility. But this, 300 civilians, untrained and terrified, relying entirely on her hands, this was different. "Hayes," she said, voice steady, "check the manual override for the hydraulic relays. We need rudder control fully restored before descent, and I need you feeding me altitude every 2 seconds. Hayes hesitated. "That panel, if you miswire it, we could fry the systems entirely. It's risky." "I know," Harper replied quietly. "I've survived worse. We either regain control or we all die." She bent over the open circuit panel, fingers moving with the precision of a seasoned fighter pilot. Sparks jumped, the smell of ozone and burnt metal stinging her nostrils. Hayes ducked instinctively. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, cold and focused, darted over every wire, every connection. Each adjustment restored a fraction of stability. The plane lurched violently as another gust slammed the fuselage. Harper countered with subtle twists of the yoke, adjusting the throttle in tandem. The cockpit shook with stress. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating jagged cliffs and turbulent clouds. Rain pelted the windows with icy force. The valley ahead waited like a trap, narrow and unforgiving. "Captain," Harper said, "I need you to feather Engine 1 gently. Keep her steady." Roland nodded, trembling, and obeyed. His hands shook on the throttle, but the aircraft stabilized, tilting slightly, then correcting. The tension in the cockpit was almost physical, pressing in from every side. Harper's mind calculated wind speed, angle of descent, thrust imbalance, and rudder response, all in fractions of a second. Another spark leapt from the circuit panel, and Hayes instinctively ducked. Harper didn't move. She guided the plane through turbulence, muscles tense, nerves coiled. She had done this before, but never with lives this precious hanging in the balance. The storm intensified. Wind gusts threatened to toss the plane sideways. The altitude bled downward, 17500, 17200, 17,000. The valley floor, still dozens of miles away, seemed impossibly narrow. Trees and rocks loomed, jagged and dark, ready to shred wings. Hayes muttered numbers like a mantra. 14,000, 13,800, 13,500. Harper adjusted the yoke and throttles, eyes scanning the horizon, calculating every fraction of tilt, every ounce of power, every potential gust. The plane responded slowly at first, then more steadily. She breathed in carefully, focusing on every detail. The captain's voice trembled. This is impossible. We'll never make it." Harper didn't answer. She couldn't. She needed to thread the plane between the peaks, align with the valley floor, and manage the damaged systems all at once. Every second counted. Every fraction of a degree mattered. The plane lurched violently as a gust hit the wing. Sparks flew from exposed circuits. Harper adjusted, holding the aircraft steady. The valley entrance appeared below, narrow, jagged, unwelcoming. Snow patches glimmered in lightning flashes. Trees and rocks pressed in on either side. One mistake and the plane would be shredded. "Prepare for turbulent spikes," she warned Hayes. "Brace for sudden gusts." The fuselage groaned and tilted sharply. Harper countered immediately. Warning lights flashed, red and angry. Lightning split the sky. The valley stretched ahead, barely wide enough. Harper's hands moved instinctively, adjusting rudder and flaps, coaxing the plane down the glide path. Hayes called out numbers, the captain muttered prayers. Outside, clouds whipped past the windshield. "Altitude dropping fast," Hayes said. "We'll hit the ridge if we don't correct now." Harper's eyes narrowed. She calculated every angle, every gust. Fingers twisting, yoke adjusted, throttles feathered, rudder coaxed. The plane responded, shuddering, tilting, then leveling. Every fraction of a second was a battle. The first cliff wall loomed. Harper adjusted, twisting the plane just enough to clear it. The metal groaned in protest. Passengers screamed, gripping restraints. Sparks leapt from circuits. The cockpit smelled of burnt metal and fear. "Left wing too close," Hayes shouted. Harper countered instantly. Inches separated them from disaster. The plane cleared the cliff, entering the narrow valley. The valley floor was below, jagged and unforgiving. Trees, rocks, patches of snow. She whispered under her breath, steadying her hands. "Just steady, just steady." The next challenge loomed, the descent into the valley itself. Every movement, every calculation mattered. The plane responded sluggishly, systems failing, engines straining. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the ground, the rocks, the trees, all threatening to tear the plane apart. Harper adjusted, nudged, coaxed, breathed. Her mind ran faster than any autopilot. Fingers, muscles, nerves, all tuned to the task. The valley floor approached, dangerously close. Sparks continued to fly from the panel. Hayes gritted his teeth, reading altitude. The captain clutched his seat, pale and trembling. "Prepare for impact," Harper murmured. "We land this plane, we survive." The plane shuddered as a gust slammed it sideways. Harper countered, twisting the yoke, feathering the throttle, nudging the rudder. Metal groaned, lights flickered, sparks flew. Outside, jagged rocks and trees loomed like predators. Harper Lane, former fighter pilot Coulson Falcon, had threaded impossible valleys before, but never with 300 lives depending on her. Every ounce of skill, every calculation, every instinct was being pushed to the limit. The valley floor drew closer every second of battle. The plane shuddered violently. Sparks flew. Outside, lightning illuminated every potential hazard. Harper tightened her grip on the yoke. She would not fail. She could not fail. Because failure meant death. For everyone, Harper Lane's hands were blistered, trembling with fatigue, but she didn't let it show. Her mind ran like a machine, calculating every fraction of motion, every ounce of thrust, every gust of wind buffeting Flight 287. The cockpit reeked of burnt metal, scorched circuitry, and ozone from sparking wires. The plane shuddered violently under the assault of turbulence, but she held it steady, coaxing the damaged aircraft through a storm that would have terrified even the most seasoned pilots. First Officer Hayes leaned over a console, shouting altitude and rudder readings, his voice tight, strained. Altitude, 12500, 12200, 12,000. Harper's eyes narrowed as she adjusted the yoke and throttles. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating jagged peaks on either side of the narrow valley they had entered. Outside, the wind screamed like a freight train, rain slashing the fuselage. The valley floor yawned below, littered with trees, rocks, and patches of ice. The margin for error was microscopic. One miscalculation, one sudden gust, and the plane would be shredded instantly. Hayes, Harper said, voice calm but commanding, "Engine 1 is our lifeline. Keep that thrust steady. No sudden spikes. Feather gently. Understand?" "Yes, yes, ma'am," he replied, voice quivering. Captain Morris, pale and sweaty, clutched the seat armrests. This is insane. The valley is too narrow. We'll never." Harper cut him off sharply. "We will. There's no alternative. Listen carefully and follow my instructions." The descent continued, turbulent and violent. The fuselage groaned, rivets protested, and panels rattled under the immense stress. Harper adjusted the flaps manually, coaxing lift from a plane that seemed determined to reject her commands. Sparks erupted from a malfunctioning circuit, smoke curling around her. Hayes ducked instinctively. Harper's hands didn't stop. Muscle memory, instinct, and pure focus guided every movement. The valley floor was less than a mile ahead. Trees loomed like jagged teeth, rocks waited to shred wings, and icy patches glistened like traps. Harper's eyes flicked over the instruments, then up to the horizon, calculating angles, wind gusts, thrust, and tilt. "We're entering the narrowest section," she said, voice steady. "Brace yourselves, turbulence will spike. Hold everything steady, no sudden moves." The plane lurched violently, rolling sideways as a gust hit the wing. Harper twisted the yoke to compensate, her arms straining, every nerve screaming. Sparks flew from circuits as alarms screamed around them. Hayes called out numbers rapidly. "Altitude, 8500, 8200, 8000. Harper adjusted the rudder and throttles, coaxing the plane into stability. The first cliff wall flashed past the window, inches from disaster. Metal groaned. The cabin screamed behind the cockpit door. Harper ignored everything except the instruments, the yoke, and the valley ahead. "Left wing too close," Hayes shouted. Harper countered instantly, moving the aircraft with precision. Inches separated them from catastrophe. The left wing scraped dangerously close to the cliff, but they cleared it. The plane shuddered violently. Passengers screamed in terror, gripping seatbelts. Sparks erupted from circuits. The cockpit smelled of ozone and burnt plastic. "Good," Harper muttered under her breath, calming herself. "Keep steady, just steady." Another gust slammed the fuselage, throwing the plane sideways. Harper twisted the yoke, nudged the rudder, adjusted the throttle. Metal protested, panels rattled, sparks flew. Outside, jagged rocks and trees loomed. The valley ahead narrowed further, leaving almost no room to maneuver. Hayes called out numbers rapidly. Altitude, 6,500, 6200, 6,000. Harper's eyes darted between the instruments and the horizon. The valley floor was approaching rapidly, obstacles looming in every direction. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the treacherous path. Her muscles burned. Sweat ran down her temples. Every decision, every movement mattered. The plane shuddered again. Harper twisted the yoke slightly, nudged the rudder, adjusted throttles, and coaxed the flaps manually. Sparks erupted from a damaged circuit panel. Hayes ducked instinctively. Harper ignored it, focusing solely on the glide path in the valley ahead. "Prepare for turbulent spikes," she warned. "Brace for sudden gusts, keep her steady." The valley floor was dangerously close. Snow patches glimmered in lightning flashes. Trees and rocks pressed in on either side. One wrong move, one sudden gust, and disaster was inevitable. Harper whispered to herself, steadying her hands. "Just steady, just steady." She guided the plane through the final stretch, adjusting rudder and flaps, coaxing stability from a damaged aircraft. The valley stretched ahead, narrow and unforgiving, but she threaded it with skill and precision. Every second was a battle between instinct, skill, and physics. Outside, lightning illuminated every hazard, jagged rocks, frozen patches, and twisted trees. The plane shuddered violently. Sparks erupted from the console. Hayes shouted numbers. The captain muttered prayers. Harper tightened her grip on the yoke. She would not fail. She could not fail. Because failure meant death. For everyone. The first trees flashed past the windshield. Harper twisted the yoke slightly, nudged the rudder, and feathered the throttle. The plane responded, tilting and shaking, then leveling. Inches separated the wings from the trees. Sparks flew from the panel. The cockpit smelled of burnt metal and ozone. Hayes called out numbers rapidly. Altitude, 3500, 3200, 3000. The valley floor was close enough to see individual trees, rocks, and ice patches. Harper adjusted again. The plane shuddered violently as a gust hit. She countered instantly. Sparks erupted. Panels rattled. Outside, lightning split the sky. "Brace for landing," Harper shouted. The plane descended, coaxed by expert hands through the valley. Trees loomed, rocks threatened, ice glittered. The valley narrowed further, leaving almost no room to maneuver. Harper twisted the yoke, nudged the rudder, adjusted throttles, and coaxed the flaps manually. The plane shuddered violently. Sparks erupted. Hayes ducked instinctively. Harper ignored it, focusing solely on the glide path in the valley ahead. The plane finally touched the valley floor, skidding over snow and rocks. Metal screamed. Sparks flew from panels. Passengers screamed, gripping seatbelts. Harper twisted the yoke, feathered the throttles, nudged the rudder. The plane skidded, groaning, but it stayed upright. They had survived the worst, but the danger wasn't over. The valley was narrow, the plane was damaged. Every moment after landing would be critical. Harper's hands were blistered, sweat poured down her face, and her muscles burned. But she didn't relax. Not yet. Because survival was only the beginning. And Harper Lane, former fighter pilot, Coulson Falcon, wasn't done. The valley was narrow, treacherous, and eerily silent after the chaos of descent. Flight 287 had finally touched the ground, but the landing was anything but gentle. The fuselage shuddered as it skidded across the uneven terrain, gouging deep scars in the snow-dusted earth. Trees scraped the sides of the plane, ice patches threatened to flip it, and rocks scraped against the landing gear. Inside, passengers clutched seatbelts, some vomiting, some crying, all wide-eyed and trembling. The cabin smelled of fear, burnt metal, and something acrid from sparking panels. Harper Lane's hands remained on the yoke, muscles straining, sweat stinging her eyes. Her mind raced, calculating every micro-adjustment necessary to keep the plane upright. She had done what most would call impossible, threading a crippled, one-engine plane through a narrow, stormy valley, dodging mountains, trees, and ice. And now, the landing wasn't over. "Throttle back slowly," she instructed. "Keep her rolling straight, don't overcorrect." First Officer Hayes obeyed, voice tight with exhaustion. "Roger, throttle back steady, stable." Captain Morris slumped in his seat, white-faced. "I don't know how we'd be dead without you." Harper didn't reply. There was no time to bask in praise. Every second after landing was a gamble. The engines were still stressed. The fuselage groaned. Sparks continued to flare from the damaged electrical panel. Passengers began unbuckling, thinking the worst was over. Harper barked over the intercom, voice firm and commanding. "Remain seated. Keep your seatbelts fastened. The plane is still unstable. Emergency crews may take time to arrive." The cabin fell silent. Panic simmered beneath the surface, but her authority held. Passengers listened, some trembling, some nodding, some whispering prayers under their breath. Harper's eyes swept the cockpit. The damage was extensive. Engine 2 was gone. Engine 1 had overheated during the descent, barely holding. Hydraulics were compromised. Wiring was scorched and sparking. Flaps were partially functional, rudder control only marginally stable. A wrong move now could flip the aircraft. "Hayes, check the status of Engine 1, Harper instructed. "Temperature stabilizing barely. Hydraulic pressure holding at 40%. Rudder responsive but delayed." Harper exhaled, jaw tight. "Good enough. We've got a fighting chance to get everyone off the plane, but we can't waste time. We need to stabilize systems before attempting taxi or evacuation." She moved to inspect the manual overrides, rerouting circuits to relieve stress on the remaining hydraulic systems. Sparks flew from open panels, smoke curled upward, but Harper worked with calm precision. Every connection had to be exact, every wire coaxed into life. Hayes assisted where he could, wincing each time a spark hissed near him. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Lightning split the sky above the valley. The wind howled through the peaks, rattling the fuselage. Snow and debris threatened to drift into the plane, turning the landing zone into a death trap if they didn't act fast. "Captain, you need to keep the throttle steady," Harper instructed. "I'm rerouting auxiliary power. We need enough juice to operate brakes and emergency systems for evacuation." Morris obeyed, hands trembling. "Steady, steady, yes." Minutes passed that felt like hours. Harper's fingers were raw, blistered from twisting and rerouting circuits under stress, sweat stinging her eyes. Sparks continued to fly, but she didn't flinch. The plane needed her fully, and she gave it everything. Finally, the rudder and brakes stabilized enough for controlled movement. Harper took a deep breath. "Hayes, run a diagnostic on flaps and emergency exits." Hayes tapped frantically, his face pale. Flaps, partially operational. Emergency doors, functional but manual release only. Smoke in the forward cabin from sparking wiring should be contained if we move fast. Harper nodded. "Good, Captain, we're going to taxi slowly. Keep engine 1 steady. Don't overrev. We need to get to a stable clearing, not a smooth runway. The plane can barely hold together." Roland's hands shook, but he obeyed. Harper guided Flight 287 over uneven terrain, dodging snow-covered rocks and ice patches. The fuselage groaned with each movement. Sparks erupted intermittently from compromised panels. Passengers held their breath. Behind them, the valley seemed to close in. Winds tore through the peaks, rattling metal, whipping branches against the fuselage. Harper felt every vibration through the yoke. One miscalculation now, and everything would be lost. "Steady, steady," she whispered. The plane finally reached a relatively level patch, wide enough to hold the aircraft without further damage. Harper killed engine 1 gradually, coaxing it to a controlled stop. Sparks fizzled as the throttle shut down. Silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the distant roar of the storm. Harper exhaled slowly. She wasn't done yet. Passengers were alive, but the plane was still a death trap. Fuel lines were exposed. Electrical systems could flare again at any moment. Evacuation was the next critical step. "Everyone listen carefully," Harper said over the intercom, her voice commanding but calm. "Remain seated until instructed. Crew will guide you to the exits. Do not panic. Do not rush. We will evacuate safely, step by step." Passengers murmured, some crying, some nodding, some whispering prayers. A few journalists captured shaky footage on phones. A mother clutched her child, whispering, "We're going to be okay. I think we're going to be okay." Harper's eyes swept the cabin, seeing fear, relief, gratitude, and exhaustion. She had done what no one thought possible, landing a crippled plane in a narrow valley during a violent storm. And yet she didn't allow herself relief. Not yet. "Hayes, check the emergency doors again. We need them operational before anyone moves." Hayes nodded, running over the manual releases. Forward doors functional, rear doors functional. No additional smoke detected, but any delay could be catastrophic. Harper took a deep breath. "Captain, we're stable for evacuation. You and Hayes will guide the passengers. I'll supervise and manage any last-minute system failures. Move calmly, but move quickly." Roland nodded, voice trembling. "Understood." Harper's gaze swept the valley outside the plane. The storm had calmed slightly, but danger still lingered. Trees, rocks, and uneven snow could trip passengers or snag debris. But they had made it this far. Harper allowed herself a fraction of satisfaction. Survival wasn't complete, but they had a chance. She turned back to Hayes. "Once passengers are out, we assess damage. Engine 1 may flare again. Systems may fail. Be ready to shut everything down if necessary." Hayes swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am, ready." Harper exhaled slowly. Sweat streaked her face. Muscles burned. Every fiber of her being was exhausted, but she couldn't rest yet. 300 lives still depended on her. She gave a final command over the intercom. "Crew, lead passengers calmly. Everyone else follow instructions. Move carefully but swiftly. Keep hands inside the aisle. Watch your footing. We're almost through this." The passengers began moving, guided by flight attendants and the captain. Harper stayed at the front, monitoring systems, watching for sparks or smoke, ensuring nothing went wrong. Every movement mattered. Every second counted. Outside, the storm raged gently now, but the valley remained dangerous. Snow drifted, wind gusted, trees swayed like silent sentinels. Harper kept her focus, ready for any last-minute crisis. And she knew this. They weren't out of danger yet, not by a long shot. Because in survival, landing was only the first battle. Evacuation was the next. And Harper Lane, former fighter pilot, Coulson Falcon, would see it through. The valley was eerily quiet except for the residual roar of the storm and the hiss of the damaged plane cooling down. Flight 287 sat precariously on uneven ground, its fuselage scarred from the violent landing. The snow-dusted earth beneath the wheels trembled slightly with each gust of wind, but the aircraft remained upright, a battered survivor in a frozen wilderness. Harper Lane didn't relax. Not yet. Every second counted, and the evacuation would be just as perilous as the descent. "Hayes, forward doors first," Harper instructed. Her voice was calm but commanding, slicing through the tension that thickened the air. "Captain, rear doors after. Everyone moves in an orderly line. No rushing, no pushing. We can't afford another accident." First Officer Hayes swallowed hard and nodded. "Understood. Forward doors open now." The cabin hissed as the emergency exits released. A plume of cold air and snow swept through the plane, sending a shiver down the spine of every passenger. A mother clutched her child tightly, and a teenage boy pressed his phone to capture shaky footage. Screams of fear had faded, replaced by trembling relief and cautious hope. "Passengers, follow crew instructions." Harper's voice rang over the intercom. "Move carefully to the exits. Keep hands inside the aisle, one step at a time. Remain calm." The first few passengers stepped onto the snow-covered ground, their boots sinking slightly into icy patches. Harper's eyes scanned every movement. One misstep, one slip, and disaster could strike again. But so far, the passengers moved carefully, guided by the crew. Hayes assisted the first families down the steps, helping them maintain balance. His hands shook, but he was steady. Harper kept watch from the cockpit, monitoring the aircraft's fragile systems and scanning the valley for additional hazards. Sparks still flickered occasionally from damaged panels, and Engine 1 hummed faintly, a reminder of the plane's fragility. "Move quickly but carefully," Harper urged over the intercom. "Stay close to the crew, keep calm." A young man slipped on the icy ground, but Hayes caught him just in time. A wave of murmurs of gratitude swept through the line. Harper's eyes flicked to the cockpit instruments. Rudder and brake systems were holding, but Engine 1 could flare at any moment. She adjusted the throttles slightly, keeping the plane stable. A mother looked at Harper with wide, fearful eyes. "Are we really safe?" she whispered, clutching her child. Harper's jaw tightened. "We're as safe as we can be. Keep moving, follow the crew. Everyone will get out, trust me." The passengers continued to file out, one careful step at a time. The storm had abated slightly, but gusts still threatened their balance. Harper's gaze never left the fuselage, ready to act if Engine 1 flared or if sparks threatened the cabin. She could feel the plane shudder occasionally under its own weight, but it remained upright. Meanwhile, Captain Morris assisted rear passengers. His hands were steady now, despite exhaustion. He guided a group of elderly passengers, carefully checking each footstep. Hayes continued to manage the forward exit, helping the last families down. The valley floor was narrow, but the line of evacuees moved with surprising efficiency. Harper took a deep breath, scanning the line of passengers. 300 souls had survived the impossible descent and landing. She allowed herself a brief, fleeting surge of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed from Engine 1. Sparks flared from the panel, smoke curling upward. Harper's eyes narrowed. "Engine 1 flaring. Everyone move faster but remain calm," she shouted. Panic threatened to ripple through the passengers, but Harper's authority held. She moved swiftly to the controls, adjusting throttles and feathering the rudder, stabilizing the engine enough to prevent it from catching fire. Hayes shouted numbers, relaying the altitude and position of the plane relative to nearby obstacles. The evacuees quickened their pace, but Harper maintained control. A gust of wind slammed the fuselage, rattling panels and shaking the steps. A child screamed. Harper's eyes flicked to the parents, to the crew, to the passengers, ensuring everyone maintained balance. The last groups of passengers descended carefully onto the valley floor. Harper's hands moved instinctively over the yoke and throttle, coaxing the plane into stability. Sparks flew, but no fire erupted. The final passengers were guided to safety. Harper exhaled, muscles trembling, sweat stinging her eyes. The plane was empty. 300 lives had been saved. The storm still roared around them, but the immediate danger had passed. Passengers huddled together, crying, embracing, whispering thanks. Some fell to their knees in relief, others hugged strangers, overwhelmed by survival. Captain Morris approached Harper, his face pale but filled with awe. I don't know how you did that. We would have died, every one of us, without you." Harper shook her head, voice quiet but firm. "It wasn't me alone. Crew, passengers, everyone did their part, but yes, we got through it." Hayes approached, hands still shaking. "I never thought anyone could pull off something like this. You saved all of us." Harper allowed herself a small nod. Fatigue pressed against her consciousness, but she didn't relax fully. The valley was still dangerous, and the plane could still flare or collapse. She needed to ensure a final assessment before any true relief. Outside, the storm began to recede. Lightning still flashed, but gusts softened. The valley floor, though treacherous, was quiet now. Emergency crews could reach them soon. Harper walked among the evacuees, checking for injuries, giving calm reassurance. A young girl tugged at Harper's sleeve. "Are we safe now?" she asked, eyes wide with wonder and fear. Harper knelt to her level. "Yes, sweetie, you're safe. You're going to be okay." The child's mother grabbed her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know how to thank you." Harper's jaw tightened. "Just stay safe, that's enough." She stood scanning the valley. The plane sat silently behind them, battered but intact. 300 lives had survived impossible odds, but Harper knew this wasn't just luck. It was skill, instinct, and courage. And the story wasn't over. Because as the passengers huddled together, exhausted, relieved, and shaken, Harper Lane realized the world would soon know what had happened here. 300 lives saved. A storm survived. A plane landed where no pilot should have dared. And the moment the story got out, the world would see her. Not just as a passenger, not just as a woman, not just as someone in the right place at the right time, but as a fighter pilot, a hero, a survivor, a savior. But Harper didn't seek glory. She never did. She wanted only survival for the passengers, for the crew, for everyone on Flight 287. And now, finally, she could allow herself a breath. Her eyes flicked to the plane one last time. The engines were silent, panels dark. The valley was calm, for the first time in what felt like eternity. 300 lives had been saved against impossible odds. And yet Harper Lane knew this was only the beginning of what the world would ask of her. The valley had fallen into an uneasy calm. The storm had passed, leaving only the remnants of snow and ice glinting under weak sunlight. Flight 287 sat battered but upright, its fuselage scarred, engines silent and panels dark. Passengers huddled together, some wrapped in blankets, some shaking, some sobbing in relief. The crew moved among them, offering water, comforting words, and steady hands. And at the center of it all stood Harper Lane, eyes scanning the valley, jaw tight, every muscle still coiled with vigilance. She had done what no one thought possible, threaded a crippled aircraft through a storm, landed in a narrow, jagged valley, and led 300 souls to safety. But relief was fleeting. Emergency crews were still miles away, and the world beyond the mountains would soon descend upon them. A distant roar echoed through the valley. Harper's gaze flicked toward it: helicopters, rescue teams, the first signs of civilization after an ordeal that had seemed unending. Harper allowed herself the tiniest exhale. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. Passengers began to emerge from huddles, blinking in the weak sunlight, some laughing, some crying, some hugging strangers. A father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders. An elderly couple clutched hands tightly, tears streaming. Phones captured shaky videos that would soon circulate worldwide. Captain Morris approached Harper, face pale but full of awe. I can't believe it. We were alive because of you." Harper shook her head, voice steady. "It wasn't just me. Crew and passengers did their part, but we made it." Hayes nodded, exhausted but grinning. "You actually did it, all of us alive. You're incredible." Harper allowed herself a small, tight smile. Fatigue pressed against her consciousness, but she pushed it aside. There was still work to do. The engines could flare. The fuselage could shift. Every detail mattered until the rescue teams took over. Then came the distant hum of another aircraft, a military helicopter slicing through the sky. Harper's heart tightened. The F-35s and rescue teams she hadn't realized were en route had arrived. In the cockpit of the helicopter, a familiar call sign flashed across the comms. "Falcon, confirm visual on the downed aircraft." Harper's lips tightened into a grim smile. Her former identity, the one buried under the civilian life she had tried to live, was about to be exposed. She didn't hesitate. Her voice over the intercom was calm, precise. "This is Falcon, visual confirmed, all survivors accounted for, situation stable pending extraction." Silence, then static, then a response. Copy, Falcon, outstanding work. You've handled this situation beyond all expectations. Harper's heart pounded, but she maintained her composure. The passengers, unaware of her past as a fighter pilot, continued their slow, careful movement toward the rescue zones. Harper remained vigilant, eyes scanning the valley floor, ensuring no further hazards threatened the evacuees. Journalists arrived first, cameras rolling, capturing stunned passengers and the battered aircraft. Questions flew like arrows. Who saved you? How did you survive? Was anyone trained for this? Harper remained quiet, letting the crew guide the passengers away from immediate danger. But soon attention turned to her. A cameraman spotted her at the cockpit steps, eyes sharp, hands still tense from the ordeal. "Ma'am, did you pilot this plane?" Harper didn't flinch. "I assisted," she said simply. "We survived as a team, that's all that matters." The murmurs among passengers grew louder. They glanced at her with awe, some whispering, "She's a hero." But it wasn't until the military extraction team landed that the truth began to unfold. An officer approached Harper, helmet under his arm, eyes sharp. "Lane, you're Falcon. We recognize the call sign." Time froze for a heartbeat. Harper's identity, the one buried under years of civilian anonymity, was out. She nodded slightly. "Yes, Falcon." The officer's eyes widened. "You're the one they trained to fly combat missions, to handle impossible situations. You saved everyone here." Harper nodded. No need for explanation. The passengers, the crew, the valley, and the storm had already witnessed the proof. Word spread rapidly. Cameras captured Harper's every movement as she guided the last evacuees to safety. Passengers whispered among themselves, awed. The realization hit. The woman who had seemed like an ordinary passenger was, in fact, a decorated fighter pilot capable of threading a plane through a storm and landing it in a jagged valley. A reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Ma'am, the nation needs to hear this. How did you do it? How did you survive? How did you save all these people?" Harper's voice was steady, even as adrenaline still pulsed through her veins. "I did what I had to do. Survival is a team effort. We all played a role. The crew, the passengers, everyone contributed. I was just in the cockpit." The officer stepped closer. "No, Harper, you were just in the cockpit. You were Falcon, a former fighter pilot. You did what no civilian pilot could do. You saved 300 lives. That makes you more than heroic, it makes you extraordinary." The sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the valley and casting long shadows over the scarred fuselage. Passengers, crew, and rescue teams looked on in awe as Harper stood tall, calm, and composed. The storm had passed, but its memory remained in every scarred surface, every shaking hand, every tearful eye. One elderly passenger approached her, trembling. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, all our lives." Harper placed a hand gently on the passenger's shoulder. "Stay safe. That's enough. Take care of each other." She stepped back as the helicopters prepared to extract the remaining crew and passengers. The world was arriving in waves. Media, military, rescue teams, and soon public attention. But Harper didn't seek it. She had never sought fame. She sought survival for everyone under her care. As she watched the last passengers board the helicopters, Hayes approached. You did it, Harper, all of it. Nobody else could have pulled this off." Harper allowed herself a faint, exhausted smile. "We did it together, Hayes. Remember that." Behind her, the valley stretched, quiet now, the storm clouds giving way to sunlight and snow glinting like diamonds. The aircraft sat silent, battered but upright, a testament to impossible survival. And Harper Lane, Falcon, stood as a hero revealed, no longer anonymous, no longer hidden. Her past, her skill, her courage had saved 300 lives, and now the world would know her true story. The helicopters lifted, carrying survivors to safety. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. The valley, scarred and silent, bore witness to the impossible. Harper remained behind for a moment, scanning the horizon, letting the enormity of the moment sink in. Then finally she turned. Her mission was over. 300 lives had survived and the impossible had been conquered. And somewhere in the skies above, her former squadron would have whispered with pride and awe, Falcon had done it again. Harper Lane stepped back, letting the helicopters carry the passengers to safety, the storm behind them, the world ahead, and her legacy, hidden no longer, shining brightly in the light of survival and heroism. The valley was silent now, but the story of Flight 287 would echo across the nation, and the world, for years to come.